Let's begin here, because many women still confuse effort with attraction. They chase, they explain, they prove themselves. Yet what truly awakens desire is not the one who insists, but the one who quietly holds her ground. A woman who knows her worth does not need to fill every silence. She does not beg for attention, nor does she fear being overlooked. Her presence carries weight long before her words arrive. That presence is not performance. It is a deep rhythm born from inner balance. And it is precisely in her restraint, her pauses, her calm, that mystery begins to take root. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Too often we are taught that connection comes from doing more. More giving, more pleasing, more explaining. But when we look deeper, we find that real attraction rarely comes from force. It comes from energy that feels centered, not frantic. Carl Jung reminded us that symbols move us more than arguments, that what is felt is stronger than what is understood. When a woman embodies presence, she becomes such a symbol. She is not trying to be desired. She simply is. Think about the difference. One woman rushes to reassure, to explain every thought, to prove her value. Another sits back, listens, and allows silence to speak for her. The first tries to be chosen. The second has already chosen herself. Which one lingers in memory? Which one creates the quiet tension that men cannot easily shake? This is where the deeper work begins. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, and the shadow, the fear of rejection that hides underneath. When we chase, we are living from persona, trying to secure approval from the outside. But when we center ourselves, when we refuse to move from anxiety, we begin the work of individuation. We step into what is ours by nature, a calm authority that does not plead but radiates. Presence is not coldness. It is contained fire. It is the ability to feel deeply while choosing when and how to reveal. A gaze, a pause. Even a gentle smile at the right moment carries more weight than endless words. Men remember not the chatter, but the feeling stirred inside them. That is the beginning of attraction that lasts. So as we move forward, hold this image. You are not a performer on a stage waiting for applause. You are the steady flame in a quiet room. Those who come near feel the warmth, even if they cannot explain it. And that is where our story truly begins. There comes a point when the mask begins to crack. She has tried to be agreeable, tried to impress, tried to show every side of herself, hoping it will secure the bond she longs for. But in that very effort, something begins to feel false. The more she explains, the more she feels unseen. The more she gives, the less she receives. This is the first fracture, the moment when her persona, the mask of pleasing, no longer holds. Jung reminded us that the persona is necessary to live in society, but when it becomes the whole identity, the soul begins to suffocate. Many women know this pain. They laugh at jokes that wound them, nod in silence when a boundary is crossed, or fill a quiet pause with nervous chatter. Outwardly, they appear agreeable. Inwardly, they feel the sting of neglect. The fracture shows itself in those small moments when the smile no longer matches the feeling. Imagine the dinner table where he speaks carelessly and she laughs to avoid conflict. Inside her, shadow stirs the hidden part that holds her anger, her longing, her sense of being ignored. She does not reveal it. but she feels it rising. This is the invisible cost of living behind the mask. Each unspoken truth becomes a weight. Each forced smile becomes a small betrayal of the self. The first fracture is not dramatic. It is quiet. It shows up in the long walk home where her own words echo back to her, and she realizes they had no weight. It shows up in the mirror when she wonders why she feels so drained after an evening where she gave so much. The persona told her she was doing what was expected. But the shadow whispers, "You are not being real." This moment matters because it awakens tension. On one side stands the persona, the mask of acceptance. On the other side, the shadow holding the truth of unmet needs and silent rage. The fracture widens when she sees the cost of pretending diminished attraction, fading respect, and a slow erosion of dignity. What was once called kindness now feels like self-abandonment. Jung warned that what is repressed in the unconscious does not disappear. It waits. It waits in silence until the day it bursts forth, often in ways we cannot control. A sharp tone we regret. A sudden withdrawal we cannot explain. A heavy sadness that falls without warning. The first fracture is this recognition. The old way of pleasing no longer works, and the shadow begins to demand attention. She is not yet free. She is not yet centered, but she is no longer innocent either. She has glimpsed the truth that living from need creates distance, not closeness, and that the more she explains herself, the less she is heard. This recognition may feel like loss, but it is also the beginning of change. Without fracture, there is no opening. Without the first crack, no light enters. This is where many stumble. They sense something is wrong, yet cling harder to the mask. They speak more quickly, flatter more deeply, or try to secure attention with overexposure. But each effort makes the wound clearer. Chasing kills desire, and explaining kills mystery. What was meant to build connection only deepens the silence. In Jungian terms, the fracture is the first invitation to individuation. It shows us that the mask cannot be the whole story. It confronts us with the shadow we would rather ignore. And in that confrontation, the possibility of integration is born. To see that the polite smile and the anxious laughter are not the truth of the soul. To feel the gap between the persona's role and the self's reality. This is not yet transformation, it is discomfort. A woman begins to notice she is drained after every attempt to impress. She notices that her words no longer carry weight. She notices that in her eagerness to be chosen, she has abandoned her own center. The fracture speaks softly at first, then louder. This is not who you are. When the fracture first appears, the temptation is to repair it quickly. She wants to slip the mask back on, to smile, to reassure, to pretend the unease never happened. But the unconscious has a way of pulling us deeper. Once the shadow has been glimpsed, it cannot be unseen. What was hidden now rises, and with it comes the inner battle between the persona she presents to the world and the truth of who she is. This conflict is subtle, yet relentless. The persona whispers, "Keep him interested. Be agreeable. Say more, so you will not be forgotten." The shadow answers, "You are exhausted. You are giving yourself away. Stop pretending this is enough." It is a quiet tug of war, but it drains the soul. Jung observed that when the persona becomes too rigid, the shadow grows restless. One cannot silence the truth without cost. The cost is felt in many ways. She replies too quickly to every message, hoping for validation, but later feels hollow. She explains her feelings in detail, believing it shows honesty, yet the weight of her words pushes others away. She tries to fill silence with laughter or stories, and afterward wonders why the connection feels shallow. Each attempt to please only deepens the divide between her outer mask and her inner self. The persona is useful. It allows us to function, to interact, to belong. But when it dominates, it becomes a prison. A woman begins to notice she no longer recognizes herself. Her gestures feel rehearsed. Her tone feels forced. Her presence feels diluted. She is seen, but not truly felt. And that gap is where attraction dies. For no one falls in love with a mask. They long for the pulse behind it. The shadow carries what has been disowned. Her anger at being overlooked. Her need for respect. Her longing for a man who listens instead of consuming. She hides these truths because they feel dangerous. She fears rejection if she reveals them. Yet the more she hides, the more the shadow leaks through in other ways. A sharp glance she regrets. A withdrawal she cannot explain. A restless sadness that follows her home. Jung warned that what we refuse to make conscious will rule us from the dark. Here lies the danger. By refusing to confront the shadow, she becomes ruled by it. She thinks she is in control, but in truth, the hidden wound is guiding her choices. She feels an urge to give more when she should be holding back. She clings when she should be releasing. She apologizes when she has done nothing wrong. The stakes rise here. For if she continues this way, she does not only lose attraction, she loses herself. Each repeated pattern carves deeper grooves in her life. Relationships grow weaker, not stronger. Her self-respect thins like paper, and every boundary becomes negotiable. She wonders why others do not take her seriously, yet it is her own mask that signals she cannot stand firm. This is the crisis of the third stage. The persona is collapsing under its own weight. Yet the true self is not fully born. She is caught between masks and mirrors, between performance and authenticity. It is an exhausting place to live, and many remain stuck here for years. They repeat the same stories, the same explanations, the same patterns of chasing, hoping the outcome will change. But nothing changes until the shadow is faced. In symbolic language, this moment is like standing before two doors. Behind one lies the familiar room, the persona polished polite but draining. Behind the other lies the shadow dark and uncertain, yet holding the key to wholeness. Most hesitate at the threshold, afraid of what they might find inside. Yet Jung would remind us that the path to individuation, the path to becoming whole, always requires turning toward the door we fear. The mask says, "If you drop me, you will lose everything." The shadow says, "If you keep me hidden, you will never be real." This is the voice of the inner split. And until it is reconciled, no relationship can satisfy, because no one can love the self you are not willing to show. The woman who reaches this point begins to see the patterns clearly. She notices how often she says yes when she means no. She hears the echo of her own nervous laughter and wonders whose life she is living. She senses that desire fades, not because she lacks beauty, but because she is not standing in truth. This realization does not yet free her, but it sharpens the tension to the point where change becomes inevitable. Jung wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. This is the heart of the struggle. She has called it bad luck, unworthy partners, or poor timing. But beneath all of that lies a single truth. Her persona has been leading, and her shadow has been denied. The fracture will not heal until these forces are brought together. When the mask begins to slip, she faces a choice. She can retreat into the familiar, patching the persona back together with quick words and nervous smiles. Or she can pause and listen to the whisper of the shadow. That pause is frightening because it feels like stepping into emptiness. Yet it is precisely in that emptiness that awakening begins. Jung taught that individuation is not the denial of our impulses, but their integration. To awaken is to stop running from what unsettles us and to turn toward it with steady eyes. The shadow once feared becomes a guide. It carries the anger she silenced, the longing she ignored, and the strength she thought was dangerous. To welcome these qualities is not to lose control, but to find a deeper center. This is where silence shifts from being awkward to being powerful. In the old way, silence was filled with chatter because she feared being misunderstood or overlooked. Now, silence becomes a doorway. A pause between words creates tension, and tension creates presence. What once felt like a void now feels like a space charged with energy. The woman who can hold that space without panic has already stepped into a new realm of power. Think of how light enters a darkened room through a crack in the door. At first, it is only a narrow line, but the eye cannot help but notice it. In the same way, when she allows her inner light to show without rushing, others feel it. They may not understand why they are drawn closer, but they sense something rare. She has stopped chasing and has begun to radiate. This is not the coldness of withdrawal. It is the warmth of contained fire. She is no longer scattered, spilling herself into every silence. Instead, she gathers herself inward, and from that center, she chooses what to reveal. A glance carries more weight than a paragraph. A slow phrase spoken with intention lingers longer than endless explanations. The shift is not in technique but in energy. She is no longer speaking to be liked. She is speaking from her core. Jung wrote that symbols are felt, not explained. When a woman embodies presence, she herself becomes a symbol. The male psyche responds not to her performance, but to the mystery she carries. He feels something stir in himself when he looks at her curiosity, desire, even reverence. And yet, he cannot quite name it. That inability to define is what keeps him returning. Awakening means seeing that the old strategies of chasing, explaining, or pleasing are unnecessary. What is needed is not more noise, but more clarity. to feel anger and transmute it into stillness, to feel desire and let it speak through the eyes, to feel tenderness and give it with grace, not desperation. This is emotional alchemy. Nothing is denied. Everything is reshaped into strength. She begins to notice how much lighter she feels when she no longer seeks constant reassurance. She sees that attraction grows not from exposure, but from restraint. She realizes that presence, not persuasion, is what truly captivates. And in that realization, she discovers a quiet freedom. She does not need to be chosen to have worth. She has already chosen herself. This is the essence of awakening, the recognition that power lies not in control of others, but in mastery of one's own inner world. Marcus Aurelius once said that the mind, when ordered, creates tranquility. Jung extended this truth, reminding us that individuation is the harmony of conscious and unconscious light and shadow. A woman who steps into this harmony no longer needs to demand. She embodies. Such presence cannot be faked because it does not come from performance. It comes from integration. It comes from the courage to face the shadow and to carry its strength into the daylight. She is no longer the one who reacts. She is the one who chooses. And in that choice, her presence itself becomes a mirror revealing to others both their longing and their uncertainty. Awakening is not the end of the journey, but it is a turning point. It is the moment when silence no longer feels like emptiness, but like a threshold. It is the moment when she realizes that her value does not need to be spoken loudly because it is already written into her being. And those who encounter her feel it not because she insists, but because she has become a living symbol of calm strength. So, this stage closes here with the image of a door, slightly open light streaming through. The choice has been made to stand in presence, to let silence hold its weight, and to embody what once was feared. From this point onward, she will no longer chase what she cannot hold. She will invite through her being, and she will discover the magnetic force that emerges when a woman finally inhabits herself. Awakening always asks for a test. It is not enough to recognize the mask or to glimpse the shadow. There must come a moment when presence is carried into action, when the new center is expressed in choice. Without action, awareness dissolves back into old habit. With action, a boundary is drawn that changes everything. For a woman who has lived too long in reaction, the test appears in small moments. The pause before answering a careless remark. The choice to allow silence rather than filling it. The measured phrase spoken from calm instead of anxiety. These are not grand gestures, yet they are turning points. They reveal whether she will collapse into the persona or stand firm in her awakening. Jung reminded us that individuation unfolds not in ideas, but in lived experience. Each decision to honor one's inner truth reshapes the psyche. Each time she holds her center, instead of yielding to fear, she integrates more of the shadow and moves closer to wholeness. Transformation is not sudden brilliance. It is steady fidelity to the self in moments that once would have scattered her. This is where language becomes a mirror of energy. A phrase spoken from need sounds hollow. The same phrase spoken from presence carries weight. Consider the difference between, "Do you like me?" and the quiet gaze that says, "There is something about you I find hard to ignore." The first clings, the second invites. One collapses into insecurity, the other rests in strength. Such language is not manipulation. It is alignment. When words flow from a centered self, they reveal without begging, they invite without chasing. They create space for the other to respond freely without pressure. This is the paradox of attraction. What is freely offered is quickly dismissed, but what is revealed with restraint ignites curiosity. The center chooses not to explain everything, but to allow mystery its place. A woman who has reached this stage begins to discover the difference between reaction and response. Reaction comes from the shadow when it remains unconscious, an eruption of anger, a plea for reassurance, a flood of anxious words. Response comes from integration, the same emotion transformed into a steady gaze, a brief phrase, a silence held with dignity. The inner fire is still there, but now it burns cleanly. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of symbols. A symbol condenses vast experience into a single form. In the same way, a phrase spoken from depth condenses a whole field of feeling into a few words. You have a way of distracting me. Said lightly, it is play. Said from presence, it is provocation and invitation at once. What lingers is not the sentence itself, but the feeling it awakens. The boundary here is not against others, but against the old self. She refuses to let fear dictate her tone. She refuses to scatter herself in explanations. She refuses to confuse attention with worth. These refusals are not acts of bitterness, but acts of reverence for her own center. Each one says, I no longer betray myself. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves. When she sees how quickly she once collapsed into proving she recognizes it was not his neglect alone, but her own unanchored energy. The transformation comes when she no longer hands away her power in the hope of being chosen. She speaks as one already chosen by herself. This is not arrogance. It is groundedness. She does not need to dominate nor to beg. She does not fear silence nor rush to fill it. She has learned to carry both her light and her shadow into the moment and to let them work together. From that union, her words emerge with a rhythm that cannot be faked. Attraction deepens here because what is rare is treasured. Most live in reaction, offering too much, too soon, or demanding certainty before it exists. The woman who speaks from her center offers less, but with more weight. She allows the other to sit with ambiguity. She leaves space for desire to grow. And in doing so, she reverses the old pattern. No longer the one who chases, she becomes the one who is pursued. But the deeper truth is that pursuit is no longer the goal. Her transformation is not about securing attention. It is about living from authenticity. The phrases, the silences, the boundaries all serve the greater aim of individuation. She is not acting to be irresistible. She is acting to be whole. Desire that arises in response is not her achievement, but a reflection of her integration. This is the threshold between awakening and embodiment. She has learned to pause. She has learned to speak with intention. She has drawn boundaries, not as walls, but as standards. Each act of restraint, each word chosen from calm, affirms her center. The shadow no longer rules from the dark. The persona no longer dictates from fear. Both are woven into a deeper self that radiates naturally. Every journey must come to a resting place. After the long struggle between the mask and the shadow, after the awakening into presence and the drawing of new boundaries, a quiet integration arrives. It is not dramatic. It is steady like a lake at dawn. She has discovered that what stays in memory is not the performance of words, but the feeling that words leave behind. Attraction, respect, even love, these are not secured by explanation, but by presence. When she speaks less, but with intention, she creates ripples that move outward into the lives of others. The phrase passes, but the vibration lingers. Jung often wrote that the unconscious responds more to images than to arguments. The image of a woman who no longer betrays herself, who carries her fire with calm, becomes unforgettable. Not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. A single pause, a steady gaze, a phrase spoken from her center. These become symbols that stir the deep layers of another's soul. Symbols are not explained. They are felt. This is the lake ripple test. You drop one small stone into the still water, and long after the hand has withdrawn, the circles keep moving. In the same way, when she speaks from her center, the impact continues even in her absence. What is remembered is not the stone itself, but the quiet waves it created. This closing stage is not about becoming untouchable or mysterious for its own sake. It is about wholeness, to live without scattering yourself in fear, to welcome the shadow instead of hiding it, to use silence not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary. Such a woman is not distant. She is grounded, and in her groundedness, she becomes magnetic. Notice how different this is from the old way. Once she sought to be chosen to be reassured, to be filled by another's approval. Now she has chosen herself. She does not run from rejection because rejection no longer defines her worth. She does not chase because she knows what is meant for her will arrive without force. This is individuation, the discovery that wholeness is not given from outside, but cultivated within. The lesson is not limited to attraction. It applies to every sphere of life. In friendship, it is the pause that allows others to reveal themselves. In family, it is the boundary that prevents resentment from festering. In work, it is the calm presence that speaks louder than self-promotion. Everywhere we go, our energy arrives before our words. What matters is whether that energy is scattered or whole. To integrate persona and shadow is to live without contradiction. The mask is no longer necessary because the self no longer fears being seen. The shadow is no longer destructive because its power has been brought into the light. Together they serve the deeper self, and in this union, clarity appears. What once felt like chaos now feels like order. There is a timeless calm in this realization. You do not need to over-explain to be understood. You do not need to beg to be valued. You do not need to shout to be remembered. The still flame speaks for itself. The lake carries the ripple on its own. Carl Jung once observed that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. Perfection exhausts us, but wholeness restores us. A woman who reaches this place does not glitter with intensity. She glows with quiet depth. She is not desperate to be pursued. She is at peace knowing that her presence already calls forth what belongs to her path. So we close here not with a strategy, but with a reminder. What you are seeking outside may already be waiting within. When you carry yourself with calm, when you let your words flow from your center, when you allow silence to hold its place, you no longer need to chase. You become an experience, and experiences are what people remember, what they desire, what they cannot easily let go. Let this be the reflection. You carry true power is not in how much you give, nor in how much you hold back, but in the integration of both. To know when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to let the moment breathe. That is the art of individuation. That is the essence of mature desire. So, as this journey closes, I leave you with a simple image. Imagine standing at the edge of a still lake. In your hand is a small stone. You drop it gently into the water, and circles spread across the surface. You do not need to chase the ripples. You only need to trust that they are already moving outward, carrying your presence farther than you know. And now, I invite you to reflect. Which part of this journey spoke most clearly to you? Was it the fracture between mask and truth, the awakening into silence, or the steady strength of speaking from the center? Share your reflections in the comments so that others walking this same path may find companionship in your words. Remember, wholeness begins not in noise, but in calm, not in chasing, but in choosing yourself. And that is the lasting lesson. When you inhabit your own presence fully, the world cannot help but respond.